The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to all of you. How you all doing? You copacetic? Huh? Peggy Parks Miller, Brother Ugawa, and Sister Robin. Greetings to you and others who will be coming on. You all are family, and I enjoy exchanging with you. Some of you that I have met, I hope to meet face to face, especially those who are out here. I want to thank everybody for supporting this show. We're going into its 5th year. Sister Gloria Briscoe, hey lady, and Maria Cotter Evans. I want to thank everybody for just taking an interest in the show, and that's extremely important. And a lot of you show your consciousness, and I know a lot of you are doing different things to advance our people. And I also want to thank the people who have made financial contributions to the show. I think in the last 2 weeks since I put out this call to try and get on a monthly basis donations that would amount to about $515 a month, which would basically pay what I'm paying for the basic stuff done by my computer tech person, Cinnabar. Brother Ugawa, who does quite a bit, he's been doing his free, and I appreciate it. Of course, there's a lot more going in our relationship than what Ugawa does. We talk each other's heads off, and I learn a lot from him. I hope he gets a few things from me. So I appreciate those donors, and anyone else that can make a donation. And if you can on a monthly basis, and right on the screen there, it shows you how to do it. And this will help me, because about $50,000 doing this show over 4 years, I can't keep doing that. You know what I mean? I draw a line on everything, and there's a basic line of self-interest, and if my self-interest is crossed, I don't do it. And that's with anything. So there'd be a certain line where I'll be just saying, nah, this is too much. As much as I enjoy it, So make your little $10 or $20 or whatever you can do. To Brother Wolf Manlu, who's one of the serious viewers of this show, Os Shakur Whitaker, and I think I already said Peggy Parks Miller, welcome to you. So normally I would be going through a little news, but there's enough news on this to cover the news on this topic. Generally, the takeover of the federal government. If that doesn't concern you, then I don't think there's much that would. And for all the people that said, oh, he wouldn't do this, you think he's serious? That means call yourself black, some black nationalist, some Afrocentrist, and you don't believe that you have an enemy. I remember entering the Black freedom movement. I've been at now 65 years, no let up. I just 3 years later, 1960, but by 63, I was leading it. I never made that assumption, and I never made that mistake. I knew this was a serious movement, and in the end, what could be at stake is somebody's life. And so underestimate my enemy, I don't think I've ever done it. If I had, I would have lost, because that's the biggest mistake you can make. Ashakur Whitaker says heaven has enemies, not in heaven, because there's no devil. Let's get that straight. God rules both regions of heaven, where punishment occurs and where the good things occur. And God's in control of both. God has no enemies. God has created forces. There ain't no great angel that turned bad. That's bull. That's a Jewish fairy tale about the devil. There are devils on earth. That's what enslaved blacks called whites. And some of us are devils. You hear me? But it's more of them. But the point is, whoever chooses to do wrong, that's their choice. So not in heaven, baby. Ain't got no enemies. I've seen heaven and I've seen God, and I don't have to have seen heaven or God. Both are all good. You know what I mean? Enemies, my butt. To Chad Jomo Kenyatta, I hear that. He says he needs to win some lawsuits before he can donate to this show. I hear that. Right on. You got to win the battles you're fighting. So for the last 2 weeks, I've been just giving you an introduction to what you're facing and trying to give you more information and more insights so you can use them. The whole purpose of this is to use this in organizing, to use this for our communities to be able to empower themselves, to use this to resist this stuff that's coming down. And so that's the purpose of this. This isn't just an intellectual exercise. And if you don't get involved in some kind of fight, somebody's going to be rolling over you. You know what I mean? On whatever level you choose to. James Pooh, greetings. Life, love, and happiness versus tech death, hate, and money and fear. Right on. I had to read that one. It looked like it was an important message there. So a couple of weeks ago, I was going through the techno-industrial investor complex. That was referring in part to Biden's definition of the tech people who are part of this complex of power, and then also going into the investor class. And last week, we showed pictures of some of those who attended Trump's inauguration. And we'll show them again, and a few people asked for copies of them, of the pictures. So the first was on that, and then the second was going into the moves that Trump is making now around woke, and attacking affirmative action and dealing with what they were moving on and why. And I should say overall, if you looked at this plane collision that just occurred in Baltimore, where you had an extremely crowded air traffic system, Sister Reed, who's on MSNBC, showed a picture of how many planes are flying at the same time. It's a wonder they ain't all hitting each other, you know? And so you had Trump responding to this, and he's responding because he's heard that some in the public are saying maybe this is due to the halting of spending that he had to then back off of across the board. And so he went in to blame the affirmative action programs, suggesting that it was incompetent blacks that caused this to happen. When in fact, whoever are the air traffic controllers are very competent, but overworked and understaffed and underpaid. And that goes back to Ronald Reagan attacking them to break up unions. National Airport, Washington, D.C. Yeah. But he wants to blame it on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because in his mind, that's a way to rile up his base. And plus, he probably believes it because he's been whipped by us enough to be worried by this. And Obama in the White House, Black Lives Matter, they kicked him out of the presidency. He was so worried that he hired a black replica of Obama when prior to running for office, and he would sit in his office and he would just say, "You're fired." Now that's how insecure he was. So they're using this rubric of woke, of diversity, equity, and inclusion as dog whistles to his base and to whites who think that blacks are being favored over them. And part of the reason that they're in trouble is because of unqualified blacks getting what they should get. When in fact, the only thing that diversity, equity, and inclusion does is see that people who are probably doubly qualified get the chance to at least be interviewed, you know? So the last 2 weeks have covered these two areas. And today I'll be going into another area. My overall point is to provide information so people can have a better foundation to proceed upon as they organize and as they handle their lives personally, as they face this. Because this is the second post-Reconstruction, but what's different about this one is we have some power right now. And so the question is, what are we going to do with it? You know what I mean? And in the past, we've done pretty well with it. We have a viewer here, BCESG UK, is from the United Kingdom. I've organized in the United Kingdom for nearly 40 years. And he says, "Greeting, Elder. I hope you remember the time you spent here in Bristol in the UK. We learned so much from you then and now." Jimmy Taylor, right on, Jimmy. You know, we have the Pan-African People's Organization has an alignment with the Pan-African Congress movement that operates out of the United Kingdom. That alignment, which this brother is referring to, was the basis for me coming and speaking there. That alliance started in 1974. So I've been going back and forth, speaking and organizing in the UK, and people from the UK, United Kingdom, have been coming back and forth working here. And then my books are distributed in the UK and Europe. And there's a brother named Pepakai, who's a leading figure in the Pan-African Congress movement that has a distribution business there. And that's where I met my wife. There's the benefits of Pan-Africanism. So the fools who say that Pan-Africanism is no good, well, yeah, no good for those who oppose African liberation, but it's certainly good for us. Since when is unity not good for any people, especially oppressed people? So I just wanted to cover a few mistakes that I think people are making right now in dealing with this MAGA movement and the move to restructure the government and to install fascism if they can get away with it. James Pooh said, this Reconstruction, blacks can be on the offensive. Well, blacks were on the offensive in the first, but we didn't have a mass movement then. We were on the offensive in the second Reconstruction, and we've been on the offensive and winning battles since the second post-Reconstruction, since 1968. And you're right. And it's that offensive that will produce change. And will, you know, we play a key part in that, have and will. So, you know, I think that there are a couple of errors certainly the media is encouraging us to make, one of which is that what's happening with Trump is chaotic. There is chaos when his soon-to-be budget director for the second time, Russell Voigt, advised freezing all funds to evaluate things, and that caused an upsurge and uproar, and they had to back off. So that was some chaos because they didn't anticipate the result. But overall, it's a mistake to think that what's going on is chaos. We already told you this. I started programming on this over a year ago, and I started with the right wing's attempt to take over the government in the 30s that most people don't know anything about. And most people weren't even interested in that show. Shows you where some of us are. We're not geared to the centrality of power. We'll go to something that says Black power, but when it comes to how does it work and everything else, some of us are geared to it. A lot of us are not. So to think that this is chaotic is to miss the whole point. If you're watching the people that Trump has recommended to cabinet agencies, it's showing you that there's a systematic move to establish first the principle that Trump can do whatever he wants. And so he has been picking some Looney Tunes for some positions. That's to demonstrate the fact that he can get whatever he wants. And that's first with the Republican Party, who he's got pretty well bent to their will. They're afraid of him because if they're up or going to be up for re-election, if he primaries them, he's demonstrated he can remove most of them from office. That's what stopped Mitch McConnell, a Koch brother, a representative, who at first wanted to put Trump out over the attempt to overthrow the election on January 6th. But once his and the corporate heads were telling him to do that. But as soon as his caucus got on him, they told him no, because, yeah, they would like to do it, but they didn't want to lose their position in the Senate trying to do it. And the easiest way to stop Trump would have been to have impeached his butt or to have tried him, which the Democrats didn't do. They played with it, particularly Garland, the Attorney General. So while Trump has his own chaotic orientation, he is also coming out of an agenda, and he's been pretty well following it with these executive orders. And if you look at these cabinet picks, the one thing all cabinet appointees have, a few of whom are qualified and reactionary, and many of whom are not, and the most seriously unqualified is Robert Kennedy Jr. I mean, this boy will have an effect on life and death with his views on vaccines that caused the deaths of thousands of people in the Fiji Islands who took him seriously because his name, last name is Kennedy. And some of them, when a serious outbreak occurred didn't take the shots because of what he said, you know, and he's got a huge following. And that's part of why Trump appointed him to satisfy his anti-vaccine movement that he put in motion around COVID, when through his mismanagement of COVID, 300,000 people end up dying, a good part due to Trump's mismanagement. He didn't listen to his experts. He did for a while, and then as soon as he didn't, he relaxed the stay-at-home measures that were necessary until you had a vaccine, you know? And some people here, even some blacks, had some issues on that. The U.S. sustained 40% of the deaths on COVID, and blacks sustained 40% of those. And I hear some blacks talking about there was no COVID. Oh, give me a break. The same ones who came on this show talking about Sleepy Joe, their criticism of Biden, which was Trump's moniker. So you're going to define somebody by your enemy. That's telling me that your mind has been captured by them. So this will have its chaotic aspects. Trump will introduce some of them, but this is well planned. This is not Trump 1, where everybody, including Trump, was surprised that he got elected. His wife was so surprised that some around him say that she cried. She says she didn't. I bet she did. And I know he had an oh shit moment and then decided to wing it, you know? So this is not chaotic. It's well planned, and there are steps and stuff being executed, and there are objectives in this. But they've already made mistakes, and they'll make more. Now, another mistake that some people have made, and I've heard this, oh, the republic is dead. These are educated people who know what a republic is. You know, it's a system where, as Aristotle said, he preferred aristocracy, but he said the most stable government was a republic, because people got the right to vote, and then they would end up voting for the same people. So many people who were faked out on the last election and didn't vote, 5 to 6 million of them, they were subject to a barrage on the internet that said the Democrats and the Republicans are the same. Neither one have done anything for you. Now, for the first time, you started hearing black people say, they're not going to vote this time. And part of it was due to that. And at a time in which, for the first time since Johnson and Roosevelt, the Democrats actually did something in their interests. And in the case of Biden, a whole lot. They had failed to communicate it well. The media did everything to shut it down, and then they did everything to get him out because they did not like his rebuilding of infrastructure, his reindustrialization, his CHIPS Act, his Infrastructure Act that amounted to 1.9 trillion, matched by over 3 trillion from the private sector. And you'll hear blacks say, oh, we didn't benefit from this 5% unemployment rate. Our unemployment rate is usually 10% or higher. It's the lowest it's been in a long time, and a huge number of good paying jobs and 17 million jobs in the pipeline. And even when I've informed a few people who've come on the show since then, and some, we were trying to educate them before the election and laid out the facts, a lot of them said they didn't want to hear it, or told them about Project 2025. Oh, you're trying to scare us. If you go to the doctor and you're feeling ill, and the doctor says you had stage 3 cancer, you might feel afraid that you're going to die. You might. But that knowledge could save you from dying. You might be able to reverse that cancer. And I've known people with stage 4 that could reverse it, and that did. Fola Behavior, a friend of mine. I had another friend who heals people on cancer, Sister McKenya, who is the main person that spread Kwanzaa around the country, died at 90 years of age. When I told her that she had stage 4 cancer, then she went and took Fola and healed her, and she's healed to this day, you know. So just because you're giving somebody a stark message and you're going to say they're trying to scare us, you want to, you want to deny reality, or do you want to know the truth so you can take action? And the truth ain't always nice. So that's the key thing that is important, that we need to understand, that don't write something off until it's dead. To say the republic is dead is to say that, because the republic is based on what I just said about Aristotle, it's dead when the right to vote is gone. A, you've got a dictatorship that's running everything. B, and the various instruments of government have been crashed. Right now, they're trying to bring them under one person. Most of what Trump is doing now can be reversed once he's out of office. But there is a move by Trump to do more than that, and I'll go into that later. So if you say the republic is dead, then that means you're not going to do anything. And the forces are not only evenly divided, actually the forces on our side are greater than the forces under Trump. Trump won by 2,300,000 votes, and Imhotep Akabulan, who watched the show last week, sent me information to show that probably 3 million votes were stolen. Black votes and brown votes through voter suppression. So, and we always knew that to win, you have to win big. That was Obama's strategy. And if it's in any way close, you're going to lose because of the cheating that they do. And then the Democrats have been weak in fighting cheating, especially when the cheating's against blacks. Even though it knocks them out, they're too busy trying to appeal to whites, you know? So the republic ain't dead, baby. And I don't particularly like the republic, but it sure is better than fascism. Huh? So that's a mistake. I also think that I talked about this last week, falling prey to fear. And it's understandable if some people get afraid of something, but fear is a myth. As Roosevelt said, the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. And that's the idea of fear. The idea of fear is usually greater than anything you fear. But the key thing about the fear thing is that's designed to stop you from doing anything. That's the point. Scare your butt to death and then get you to escape. Go shopping. Go to the movies and do all of that. If you want to do that, fine. But fight. And as we've learned in Black liberation movements, what happens when you fight, and especially when you win, but the course of fighting, it gives birth to a new person. And you'll be able to see things you never saw before. So while the Republicans are talking about woke, well, guess where that woke come from? As King said, starting in the Montgomery bus boycott, and Garvey made the same observation in organizing the Garvey movement, that as blacks began to organize and fight, at that time, the term for us was Negro. A new Negro emerged, and out of that came Black consciousness. Why? Because in the course of fighting your enemy, and especially when you win, but win or lose, when you're standing up to them, it kills the fear. And in killing the fear, you're free to think. And when you free the mind, as the master, the president of Funkadelic said, I cleaned it up, free the mind and the behind will follow, you know? So this is the key. Fighting gives you a sense of power. That's how Frederick Douglass freed himself, whipping Covey, the slave slave breaker. He said after that he was no longer a slave because he's mentally free, shackled by chains, but not in the mind. And after that, the physical freedom came, So fear, that's their game. And by the way, they're full of it. They are really full of it because, as we know, the central motivation of this whole movement, the MAGA movement, is to reverse the ethnic course of American history, to turn America back to the page of whiteness, not just in eliminating history and culture of African people, but removing enough people of color in this country, if they could all, but enough, so that whites can predominate. Those days are gone. Just as the day of white supremacy is gone. They're not supreme in the world anymore. Have you seen what the Chinese did with AI just recently? For nothing? Huh? They've outfoxed them in their own foxhole. And that's a key thing in this age of technology, is to be a tech step or two ahead. And they're putting this stuff out there at almost no cost. So, you know what I mean? Later, for this idea that what they're doing is something we have to fear. No, what they're doing is something we have to know, and we have to fight, and we have to strengthen our own power among our own individual or personal selves and organizationally as a people, not only here, but globally. So another mistake is for people to wait for the Democrats to do something. Oh, that's a big mistake. Because with the exception of AOC and the others in that group, Bernie Sanders and Biden's programs, the Democrats are part of the problem. And Biden was a part of it globally, I mean, allowing what was going on and is going on to this day among the Palestinian people in Gaza, and not allowing the Ukrainians to negotiate out their situation with Russia, which they were prepared to do. So in the old warmonger sense, he did the same old thing. But in terms of his programs, those programs offer something positive. Though I must say, I don't think that Biden saw himself breaking away completely from the opposition that he was raising, his program up, was raising up against, the forces of privatizing everything or trickle down economics. But he took a big bite out of them. So the topic for today is designed to reveal the true objectives behind this current government takeover and what's really behind it, ideologically, economically, politically. Because when you know your enemy, then that's half a victory in a fight. And it's lazy to just say white supremacy. It's been the lazy thing we do, and we don't go and study the enemy, That also paralyzes you. Suppose Muhammad Ali had gone into the ring and assumed black supremacy, in the major opponents that he faced. And he did say that each one of them, he faced opponents that he was afraid of. He admitted it later. You know what I mean? George Foreman, he was afraid of him, because Foreman had a punch that was like a tree trunk hitting you, and the other fighters that he faced, they were stronger than him. Muhammad Ali was not a power puncher. He was a finesse fighter. He rarely hit anybody in the body. It was always in the face. He knocked some people out, but he had more to him than that. And so in his case, while he had fear, he overcame it, but he did not allow his view of his opponent to overpower him, to take him out. So Sonny Liston, people think, oh, after you see the fight, Sonny Liston was easy to take out. Sonny Liston was a powerful puncher. I mean, he was a killer in the ring in the sense that, he took most of his opponents out. And Muhammad Ali admitted that when he was selling all these wolf tickets, he was scared to death, but he also believed he could beat them. So if you have fear, overcome it and fight. And then as you gain victories, you're going to understand that, well, maybe that fear is something that you don't need to hang on to, because some of us treat it like it's a marriage partner or something. You know what I mean? So the topic for today, and particularly the discussion of that topic, is designed to really get to what's really behind what's going on. You know the song, What's Going On? What's really going on? Because what you see often isn't what's happening. Gloria Briscoe said, my donation went through. Are you using the correct Cash App name? Yeah, good. Yeah, use the name that's right up here on the screen. It's right there. Use that one. This is the real point of this. So my topic for today is the Trilateral Commission: Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Trump, and Project 2025. Now that sounds like a lot. I'm going to focus mainly on one of them, and then on some stuff that's going on right now. I'm not going into all these administrations, but we often are just looking at what's going on right now and not seeing its origin. And if it's happened before, not even knowing it. Now, Trump claims that what he's out there to do is to attack the deep state. This is his thing. The deep state. Some radicals, especially whites and maybe a few blacks if they're dumb enough to fall for it, but that would be very few, might fall for this, the deep state, So on one level, the deep state is supposed to be the CIA and FBI, and Trump has a grievance against them, and I certainly do, and most of us should. I mean, they tried to kill me, FBI, 2 times. I let them take one of my jobs, and they tried to take the other, and I stopped them. I've talked about this before. And the CIA came after me with a real good program. I mean, I really had to respect them. They sent somebody good, And if you go back to the shows, I described that. I have one of our members in Pan-African People's Organization, Ustadi Kadiri, who I gave the assignment of uncovering the CIA op. I'm a counterinsurgency specialist. I'm a warrior. And I do my homework. And then I got good intuition. You know what I mean? So I know you like stories about how the FBI killed people. Well, I can tell you some about how after I defeated them, I could have, but didn't. And I had my reasons, mainly because I get caught. I ain't doing nothing where I'm losing my life over something. But, the point is, so deep state sounds like, oh, yeah, he's really going after something. And then he's telling his base he's going to clean up corruption. And of course, he's going after woke and affirmative action programs. Because, these blacks are up here attacking us and taking our jobs. And by our, he means white men's jobs. Because if you notice, the first job he took was a 4-star white woman in the Coast Guard, 4-star general, highest rank any woman's ever achieved in the Coast Guard. 4-star, that's as bad as it goes. Got rid of her. Why? He couldn't give her a reason. She was a woman and happened to be white. So it looks like on the surface, this is a cleanup of waste and corruption and of the oppressive deep state. Well, first of all, if you think for a minute that Trump is going to end the Attorney General's office, which supervises and is over the FBI. If you think he's going to end the CIA, you're thinking wrong. He wants to go in and punish people who went after him for good reason. But then he wants to tame these agencies to do what he tells them to do, period. That's it. So this is the real objective. But he ain't talking about really going in and upsetting the deep state. Why? Because the deep state is the Defense Department. That's where most of the money is, you know? And they're going to transfer more money to the Defense Department. And the deep state are those agencies that reward the rich. He's going to see that more is diverted to them, to his own group. And that's why Elon Musk is over at the richest man in the world. You think he's going after anything that's going to affect him or his class. So this is smokescreen. And the best way to carry out a smokescreen is to use blacks as the cover. Because I repeat this again, as Lyndon Johnson said, if you want to pick a white man's pocket, just use the N-word, or woke, or affirmative action, or anything that's got to do with blacks or people of color. That's why he rammed so hard on immigration. Hard. You're now seeing the results of that. One Mexican man who had voted for Trump, his wife was deported. If one goes through, the other one should go through. So try it again. If you do it right, it'll go through. Okay, so my topic, the Trilateral Commission, Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Trump, and Project 2025. I'm looking at what's behind this. And I want to start, I wanted to put this up, but I wasn't able to get it up in time. So I want to read, it would have been much better coming from the author himself, Gil Scott-Heron, and Whitey on the Moon. And my rendition can't be half as good as his. And he was a master poet, one of the great influences on hip hop. And I want to just, read this because it has meaning on a couple of levels in terms of looking at what is really behind this government takeover, MAGA, Trump, and this whole effort to introduce what could become fascism in this country. So with Congo drums beating, Gil Scott-Heron, in talking about Whitey on the Moon, that's the title of the poem. And he said, this poem was inspired by Whitey on the Moon. And by the way, before getting into this, there's a Dogon picture of a Hogon, and a Hogon, H-O-G-O-N, is a Dogon priest. And he's sitting on the moon with his staff of authority. And basically the Dogon said about the moon, it's dead. It's a dead place. Now it plays a role in the solar system, very important role. Two most important planets in this solar system are the sun and the moon. All the others are important, but those are the two most important. But it isn't exactly a place to go to live, but they could figure maybe they can find some stuff that they could dig up there or position themselves better in intergalactic war. That is, you have to have something up in space to do war these days, but you don't have to go to the moon to do it. But this is with Congo drums beating, Gil Scott-Heron, and I'm not attempting to approximate his delivery. I just want to get the message. A rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the Moon. Her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. I can't pay no doctor bills, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. Now, there's more to it than that, but what's the point of that? The point is that the drive that you're seeing now to take over this government, to break it, to make it bend to the will of one person, Trump, but particularly those around him, the super rich who controls most of the wealth of this country. The point is, the reason that Gil Scott-Heron was saying that he couldn't pay his doctor bills is because of the taxes imposed on him in the low pay. And his taxes were paying for Whitey on the moon, but he was also paying for Whitey in Vietnam, Whitey in Afghanistan, Whitey in Iraq, with blacks, brown, red, and yellow, making up a good part of that force as well. So if you want to know what's really behind all of this, it's all about taking what you got, and transferring it to their pockets. What you're witnessing now is a move to carry out the biggest steal that's been carried out, an exchange of wealth from the poor, few that are working class and middle class, to the rich. So this is the real point of Whitey on the moon and Whitey everywhere else in the world. And I thought this was a pun because if you noted when Trump gave his inaugural address, he made a special reference to the fact that the government would support Whitey on Mars. And that was a reference to Elon Musk. And Musk raised his fist at that. Did you watch it? Huh? That place is too hot, I think, to live, but it's a place to explore. And Elon Musk has got rich off of federal budgets. Is he cutting any of those? Oh, please, So this is what I want to address here. And what I want to do is to give you an understanding of this, what's going on, because part of the topic here is the Trilateral Commission, Carter in particular. It starts off with Carter. And so what I want to do is take a little snippet from a speech, a eulogy delivered by Andrew Young at Jimmy Carter's memorial. Andrew Young was appointed by Jimmy Carter as ambassador to the United Nations until he met with Yasser Arafat and he was fired. And then later, much later, Carter apologized. Much later. Just because he met with the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization. I mean, he's in the UN. He's supposed to meet with everybody, And then after that, Andrew Young was mayor of Atlanta. And before all of that, he was principal advisor to Martin Luther King. And when they were going to assassinate, because the best research on King's assassination shows that military intelligence took him out. They had a mafia shooter behind, and military had the first shot. And if they couldn't make the first shot, the mafia was to make the second. But the mafia was there for plausible deniability. So if this is ever exposed, the government's role in King's murder, assassination, they could blame it on the mafia. And there was a whole series of things to get King to move to the Elaine Hotel because it was like a shooting gallery. J. Edgar Hoover did that, discouraged him from going to the white hotel that he'd been staying at in Memphis to get him there so that he would be good subject for assassination. And The black policemen who volunteered to protect them were pulled off duty, put under house arrest, told that their lives were in danger. And the black firemen who worked in the fire department close to where the shooting occurred were also transferred. And then he was assassinated. But in the documents that have come up, they had two targets. One was King, the other one was Andrew Young. He just wasn't there at that time. There's more to it than that. So Carter planned out his whole memorial, and I watched the whole thing, because you get some history out of this. And so he had him deliver some biblical verses because he's a preacher. And then he had him delivering his eulogy, the only one that wasn't written out, And I have a reason you'll see in a minute for this. So what I want to do here is play a snippet, a small part of Andrew Young's statement, because it ties into the topic of Carter and the Trilateral Institute.
The Apostle Paul, in writing to the Ephesians, the 4th chapter, the 32nd verse, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Jimmy Carter, for me, was something of a miracle. I was born in the Deep South shortly, a few years after him, and it was always a place of miracles. I couldn't see how we could have had the differences in background, the coming from different places on the planet, the experiences of slave and slave owner, the diversity of color and creed and national origin, and still become the great nation that we are in the United States of America. It was something of a miracle. And I don't mean this with any disrespect, but it's still hard for me to understand how you could get to be president from Plains, Georgia. I knew Plains from my pastorate in Thomasville, Georgia, about 60, 70 miles south of there. And I was even nervous driving through Plains. And Plains and Sumter County gave us one of the meanest experiences that we had in the civil rights movement. So much so that Martin Luther King said that the sheriff of Plains, of Sumter County, he really thought was the meanest man in the world. And when I first met Jimmy Carter running for governor, and said, the only thing I know about Plains and Sumter County is Fred Chappell. And he said, oh yes, he's one of my good friends. And that was the last thing I wanted to hear. And yet time and time again.
So I played that mainly to answer this question, because it's a good way, because I'm a poet too, I like a little artistry and stuff. So he raised the question of how could somebody from a little town like Plains, Georgia, get elected president of the United States of America? And then he went into telling you the other stuff about how Carter was friends with one of the most racist of racists in that county, Sumter County, and how dangerous it was to go through there. You know what I mean? So what's the connection? What is it that enabled Carter to become president of the United States? So if you listen to the whole week of Carterism and what Carter did, how he was a failed president, but after his presidency, he did good things, building housing for the homeless, or, cheap housing for humanity, and ending some diseases in Africa. And he lived in a simple house, and then at the memorial, one of his chief advisors then tried to rehabilitate his programs themselves. So how is it that you go from Plains, Georgia, governor of Georgia, to president of the United States? Oh, according to the story here, he was a nice guy and he was restoring morality to government after Watergate. But the truth is, even though this is a messed up version of this book is called The Crisis of Democracy. And this book was commissioned by the Trilateral Commission. And the executive director of the Trilateral Commission was a man named Zbigniew Brzezinski. The organizer of the Trilateral Commission was Nelson Rockefeller. Trilateral Commission was organized in 1973. It was organized in response to the collapse of the Bretton Woods Agreement, which had been the agreement that created a new global power structure for the United States. And one of the things it did was make the dollar the currency of exchange for the world and centered its value on gold. And when Nixon goes down over Watergate, and he went down for much more than Watergate, I think a key reason he went down is because he decided to take the dollar off the gold standard without consulting Rockefeller and the other corporate elite that own and run the country. And I think that's the main reason they went after him, because presidents have been bugging people forever. And they've done a whole lot worse and didn't get thrown out of office. And Reagan did his thing of arms and drugs that he did with Iran, and they just winked at him and got away with it. You know what I mean? So the Trilateral Commission is an organization created by Nelson Rockefeller to try and restore some kind of order at a time in which the United States was then going into decline. And it was made up of Western Europe, the United States, Canada, and Japan. How did Jimmy Carter become president? Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was National Security Council advisor for him, but was the executive director of the Trilateral Commission, he recommended that Jimmy Carter be put on the Trilateral Commission. And so Jimmy Carter attended their meetings, but he didn't just attend their meetings, he attended their executive meetings. And so he was in on decision-making. And so when Carter was running for presidency, one of his key campaign organizers said that a key reason he got elected to office is that membership on the Trilateral Commission got him a lot of votes. Well, that's an understatement. It got the economic establishment on his side. And that was able to give him a victory in the election. So when Andrew Young said, it's a mystery to me how somebody coming from such a little small place could become president of the United States, I think he knew better. I think he knew that he was a part, Jimmy Carter was a part of the Trilateral Commission. And by the way, almost all of Carter's cabinet came from the Trilateral Commission. But most important, and this is the tie-in between Carter and Trump especially, is that the Carter agenda was shaped by the Trilateral Commission. So that it looks like, you know, in terms of his goodbye and everything else, farewell on his eulogies and everything else, he was this humble man who, you know, lived simply and looked after the poor, lived in the same small house and all the rest of this stuff. But what is missed is what he did while he was in office, other than to say he was either a failure or he did a few little things. And the big failure was not getting reelected to a second term. So it is very important to understand that the Trilateral Commission's goals and objectives were what drove Carter. And it's interesting that Andrew Young would have the closing remarks because it suggests just the opposite, that particularly Carter was somebody who was very sympathetic to Blacks. Now, in that eulogy by Andrew Young, he said that Carter was good friends to one of the most racist people in the county, you know? That should tell you something. And then if you know anything about Carter, when he runs for office for governor, he runs a standard campaign that does not suggest that he's in any way supportive of the Black freedom movement, civil rights, or anything else. But once he gets elected, he says, we're going to turn a page and we're going to embrace civil rights for Blacks and people of color and blah, blah. And so that is the picture that you get of him, that he's a Southern governor who had turned a corner, and he was sympathetic to Blacks. But the fact is, he was following a trilateral agenda. And what was the essence of this trilateral agenda? What was the main concern that the Rockefellers had? And a main concern expressed, and I covered this briefly before in this book, The Crisis of Democracy, the American section, and there are different sections in here where they're looking at what they call the crisis of democracy. So they have a Japanese section, and they have Europeans writing, and then they have the American section, and it's written by a very brilliant European-American political scientist named Samuel Huntington. He's their best headhunter, meaning politically he had the sharpest mind. And when the richest people commissioned somebody to con the American people, though this book was not written for general consumption, anyone that might read it, they want them to consume the propaganda. And so he was very good at putting out an analysis on what he called the crisis of democracy facing the United States. He wrote the American section. Samuel Huntington also wrote a master work that Asa Hilliard told us about, because Asa read almost everything, called The Clash of Civilizations. If anybody's read that, say so. And if anybody's read Crisis of Democracy, other than those that read it when I went through the show before, put that up there. If anybody's read it, put it up there. Because if you ain't going to know the enemy, you should know their best thinkers and their best analysis. And then that will give you an idea of how you move. So what was the main concern that Rockefeller had that the establishment those that run the country had. What was it? It was that America had experienced too much democracy. And that led to a crisis of democracy. And in his analysis of crisis of democracy, Samuel Huntington notes, and he's referring in the crisis of democracy, he's referring to the Black freedom movement, the Black Power movement, the Black Panther movement, the Pan-Africanist movement, the free speech movements, the anti-war movement that we launched. We were the first to oppose the war in Vietnam. This movement, particularly the Black freedom movement, created a problem for the government at a time in which they were in the midst of losing the Vietnam War, which is lost by the early 70s. And so by crisis of democracy and too much democracy, they meant that the Black movements had triggered something that had not happened before. Because one of the things that Huntington noted was that government works best when the people participate the least. And this system is set up to discourage people from voting. I mean, if they wanted people to vote, they would give people a day off, or they would do it on Sunday. They'd even make it mandatory. You know what I mean? Then they'd have trouble because they would get a lot of people who have some interests contrary to those that they push getting out there and voting. So they do their best to discourage voting, and then they do their best to steal votes to incline it in their favor. And right now, the Republicans probably stole, as I pointed out before, over 3 million votes in this last election. And the Democrats haven't really whimpered about it. That ought to tell you something, you know? So the Trilateral Commission's concern, and one they voiced, you can be sure, to Carter, was that this was the overriding concern that needed to be addressed. The government had been overloaded with demands coming from Blacks, the poor, youth, women over time, but it had been triggered by this Black freedom movement. And so what needed to happen is the government needed to shift gears. And that's basically what Carter did. He carried out a set of programs that would shift gears. Now, here's the key point before getting into what he carried out. And this is, again, an indication of where your power is. And I've made these points before for some. Most of them haven't heard it, but I'm putting it in a different context. The reason that the government got overloaded with demands coming from these movements is that as Blacks entered the movement and began to hit the streets and make demands, and particularly in the South, and then in the North, but especially in the South, what happened is a group of people that had not been active before politically had become active. And it wasn't in the electoral politics per se, it was in the streets, because the streets is where real Black power is. Black power for Black people comes from Black people. Black power for white people comes from institutions, corporate institutions primarily, whatever form the corporate institution is. And right now, as we pointed out before, the techno system has got the richest people in it. But the investor class, those that manufacture, the arms industry, Boeing, the two largest export items in the American economy is culture and aeronautics, and they compete. And Boeing is at the head of aeronautics, and Boeing has been doing a terrible job. You've seen planes crashing because they have not dealt with safety standards, because they're trying to compete with Eurobus, the European manufacturer of airplanes. And soon they'll be competing with China because China is moving into every area that the West has. But right now, those are the central actors. And so the military industrial complex budget has been the biggest, of course, during World War II, but after. I pointed this out before. I haven't gone into this in detail and won't here, but since Truman created the national security state and made the draft continue after World War II when you had no enemies in sight, and began to beef up the defense budget, which is now over $1 trillion. So when Trump's talking about going after the deep state, he's not talking about going after the defense budget because that's where the goodies are for the rich. So the Trilateral Commission to Carter was to move away from this whole emphasis on democracy, particularly not talking about it, but responding to the demands that are coming from Blacks, from poor, from students, from women. Because what we accomplished in the Black freedom movement was when we began to push our demands down, not just for the right to vote and for the ending of segregation, but began to raise the issues of poverty, which put Johnson in the position of putting together a war on poverty program that becomes underfunded as he invests more in the war in Vietnam, but puts millions of dollars into what he calls the Great Society programs. And what begins to happen is people's thinking, white people, as well as Black and brown and yellow and red, shift. Black and brown was probably, and red was already there, probably yellow too. But whites began to shift. What? To putting more money into social programs than was put into defense. And that's what happened. When Carter enters office, the budget for the defense complex, the military industrial complex, is down. It's still greater than any other part of the government, but the amount invested for the poor, Black, brown, red, yellow, is great. And his charge is to shift it. And so what you have is most people don't see this because when they talk about bringing poverty to America and the policies that lead to that, they talk about Reagan. But it's Carter that comes first. And it's the Trilateral Commission that gives him his basic marching orders. But the key thing to understand then is why there was a crisis in democracy, because when we began to resist and oppose the system, as I pointed out, and this is a key power that we have as a people, we created chain reactions and it began to inspire others to do the same thing. And so it wasn't just that we radicalized youth, for example, the movement I led gave birth to the free speech movement at UC Berkeley and then later across the United States, but we shift their political values. And so had the students who were white, and see, this is a very important thing because we just like to confine our power to us because that's all we think we got is us. We're alone, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Now, you're strategically located in this country. So whatever move you make, it, will produce change in other places because, as Malcolm said, you're inside their house and you can upset their furniture. You're strategically located. But it's even more than that. Because you're here and because your culture is the popular culture of this country and the world, and it is the most complex culture in the world and the most intelligent. And every time Blacks move as a group, we move intelligently. 87% of Blacks knew what to do in this election. Whites split. 54% of white males, 52% of white females going for Trump, 40% of white females going for Harris, and in the 30s for white males. They always split because their stuff ain't no good. It messes over them. And that's always been a struggle inside of this country. If you study American history, you'll see from the very beginning, when we're being enslaved, whites are having their own struggle against their own elite. When that Constitution is put together, that's to go against Shays' rebellion. And Shay and them, they wanted redress. They were trying to take their property, tax them when they had been fighting in the War of Independence. So they were fighting to roll that back. But that was just a part of the fight because there's always been a struggle between whites, between the poor and the rich. And so when that Constitutional Convention is convened, there's a lot of whites that don't like it because they see it as a clamp down on the average person, which it was, because they're going to centralize power in a central government. And so as a result of that, they see, and that's the way it worked, the people who founded the country represented the 1%, with George Washington being the richest. And they were going to see that 1% controlled 50% of the wealth, and most of that came out of slavery. And that was the basis for building up industry, north or south. That's where their wealth came from. So there was always a struggle between the poor and what they called the middling, those in the middle, people who owned a little land, had a farm or whatever, and the rich. And so that's been a struggle that's been going on since the founding of this country. And so, when we're dealing with the Trilateral Commission and Jimmy Carter, this is an extension of that. And so blacks, because we had this strategic position, we began to radicalize other groups. White students who were moved by us, and the movement I led played the major role in this, in moving white students at the premier institution of higher education, UC Berkeley, a huge number of Nobel laureates and everything else, a public university. These students, instead of embracing the Marxist agenda, comes up with a new left. And what is the basic decision-making that they adopt? They adopt the Black decision-making method that they learned from us. San Francisco Freedom Movement that they learned in Mississippi with Bob Moses and the rest of them, and that is consensus-based democracy. It's a new left. And that new left is race conscious. That is, they're trying to at least address racism, which the white left never really did. So I'm making the point that the fear that the Trilateral Commission has, even Huntington did not know what was driving it. And that was the power of the culture, the political, social, culture, economic, artistic, because when we hit the ground and fight, we bring beauty to it. It ain't ugly because we're standing on the truth. That's why we'll stand together. That's why blacks knew what to do in this last election. And by the way, I congratulate the masses of black people who are withdrawing their business from various businesses and stuff. They're right. It's just that it's got to be organized. But right now, it's a mass sentiment. Nothing happens without a mass sentiment. So this is also helping to inform that, because that's where you can really hurt them. Your $1 trillion plus income, just concentrated on one business, just one. See what you take out of their pocketbooks and see how long they stay on Trump's side. Because whatever he can do from the federal government side, they ain't doing too much for a lot of these businesses, these multinationals that depend primarily on consumers. And then we'll get others who will do the same thing. So this is the point. Carter was carrying out a trilateral agenda. He never said it. The media doesn't talk about it. Those who are talking now don't even know that, because they're not that well informed. But if they come from the New York Times or anywhere else, they know, and they ain't talking. You know what I mean? So this is what Trump, Carter ends up doing is basically going to lead to Reagan, it's going to lead to Clinton, and it's going to lead to Project 2025. And it's going to lead to Trump being able to do a fake populism where he claims to be on the side of the poor when in fact he's dead on the side of the rich. And now he's getting checks written right and left. And by the way, Snoop Doggy Dogg, when he did his thing for the inaugural, that was pre-inaugural, that was a cryptocurrency ball. Crypto. You hear me? And Snoop has got nearly 90 million followers on Instagram, and he's lost half to 1 million of them. He knew what he was doing when he went in there and didn't care, because in 2016, he had told people that anyone that supported Trump basically the same was a traitor. And now he's a traitor because he says, he got my friend who was former head of Death Row Records, who he now owns, out of prison. And then when he says that he endorses Trump, he said, well, he didn't do anything to me. He got my friend out of jail. Huh? And so what he's saying is that it doesn't matter that he's doing it in black people as long as he can do his buck dance. And then I hear blacks who are into hip hop dismissing the criticism of Snoop Dogg because they're identifying with his ability to make money. And they're speculating on how much he made, because if he did something for the inaugural, around cryptocurrency, they figure he got paid big, and he invested in crypto anyway. You know what I mean? So the identification with wealth is, and what affected him individually is more important than your people. And I've identified this before in the choice between two cultures analysis, that the weakness in the black cultural underbelly is a certain sector of black males, many of which are young or younger, but some are older, whose primary value is materialism and individualism over spirituality and over our people. And that's the group that Trump mined and got 22% from in this last election. 78% of brothers voting for Harris and 92% of sisters. Sisters didn't move. Sisters are the ones who have got the deepest understanding, but brothers do too, because it was close to 87% of black people that voted the same way, the right way. I've said this before, 87% of white people in their history have never done the same thing together at the same time. Never. Show me one time. Never. And we up here talking white supremacy. The way you beat them is you pick them off. That's one way. Huh? So Carter is picked to place the economy over the interests of the people. But it doesn't appear that way because nobody says it, and the media is not going to expose it. But if you look at what Carter actually did, then you will understand what the problem is. Now, the key thing in the crisis of democracy, where they identify too much democracy as the problem, they cited Madison, who was a founding father, one of the writers of the Constitution, who said the role of Republican government is to control the people and then to control itself, which is, of course, a contradiction. I mean, if you've got the control, you got the power to control things, the last thing you're going to do is control yourself. And by the way, this is a guiding principle of Arianism, which is arbitrary power, which Trump is carrying to the bank, which is the Supreme Court has given him a get home free pass on. You know what I mean? That if anything he does has to do with executive authority, it's legal. Really? Huh? And that's pretty much what the Supreme Court has been doing for some time. As Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said, when asked what was the authority of the Supreme Court based on, who did they serve, he said their decisions were based on the interests of the most powerful segment of society. I've referred to this before. And he then said he regretted saying that because he exposed the truth. He said it sounds Nietzsche-like. Friedrich Nietzsche, the author of Will to Power, the best thinker that they produced in the modern world, Friedrich Nietzsche, because he mirrors their thought. How many of you studied Nietzsche? Huh? You should. Trump is kind of like an expression of him, except Nietzsche was smart. And he wasn't, as has been made out to be, a Nazi, contrary to popular opinion. His most favored thinkers were Jewish. He was not a Nazi. I studied this guy inside out. You know what I mean? And so the institution of America is founded on the few controlling the many. When the head of the Constitutional Convention was asked who should run America, he said, those that own it. Huh? So you'll say, then what's the difference between that and what Trump's doing? There's a lot different. We'll go into that one in a minute. So this was Carter's charge. And he made some very unpopular decisions that he was a very smart person. He was a nuclear physicist, nuclear engineer. Wasn't so good with people, you know. But he was smart in terms of making decisions and knowing what he was doing and knowing the consequences. He was no dummy. And by the way, know your enemy. One of the things you should do is give them credit for their strengths. If they got strengths, acknowledge them, because you'll get whipped if you don't. Wolf Manlou says that Biden didn't act on that immunity, which was ruled upon before the election. So how afraid was Biden of Trump? I don't think he could do anything about what the Supreme Court had decided, except protect everybody that needed protection. And since he freed his own family, which I understand, because they were coming after him and his family, he's the only one he didn't free, you know, in terms of pardons. But the others, you know, the lame Democrats are all going to blame him for that after he gives them a pardon. Most of them aren't throwing it away, you know. So I don't think there was much that he could do other than give people pardons or whatever. And I'm sorry, there wasn't a major campaign launched for Rap Brown's freedom. It was good that Leonard Peltier was free, though he's under house arrest. He could have exiled Trump. Hey, the real mistake of the Biden administration, Biden was not to put in an attorney general that was serious and went after Trump. And of course, Garland, who was Obama's original pick for the Supreme Court, and that was blocked by Mitch McConnell, and then Trump won. This was the middle of the roader. He went after everybody, all the low-hanging fruit, all the little ones that were involved in January the 6th. And only after the House does an investigation on January the 6th does he then empower a prosecutor to go after Trump, and didn't have enough time, you know. So that was the first thing. Now, it would have been interesting what the Supreme Court did on that. And by the way, I should point out that just as when Carter comes into office and he's being given a mandate to go after an agenda that favors the corporations and really doesn't favor the people, the government is facing a crisis of confidence, and a lot of faith has been lost in the government. Now it's even worse. And so what's happening with Trump is he's trying to feed off of this with fake populism and a huge base that is still smaller than the base opposed to him if properly organized. So let's get into what Carter actually did as president that is generally not known. Basically, overall, what Jimmy Carter did was to be the first president to introduce neoliberalism as the fundamental policy of his presidency. And neoliberalism at bottom is privatizing everything, taking public monies and putting them into private pockets. That's the simplest way to describe it. It has a domestic angle where they go in and try and grab everything that your tax dollars pay for and pocket it. And then they have an international thing. And that's where they go out to Africa and to the Caribbean especially, and to some areas of Asia. And any aid is conditioned on their resources being put into private hands, the wealthy in this country. And I should say that the reason that they moved this way is that the American government is organized, and I pointed this out before, on John Locke's second treatise of government, in which the role of government is to protect property. When he wrote this as a part of what becomes the Constitution of the United States, he didn't write the Constitution, but they used his idea of Republican government. He had no idea that money would be this vast and institutions would have this much power. But he understood the power that they had then and wanted to protect it. And so the organization of the Congress is basically set up to protect wealth. It is not set up to regulate it, to control it. It is in fact controlled by wealth. So that's the nature of how this system is set up. And John Locke played a major role in writing the Constitution of South Carolina. And South Carolina is the major slave state with the largest population of Africans at that time in the United States. And by the way, it was South Carolinian blacks who picked Biden. And I think it was a smart pick because it was a pick to beat Trump. And people that didn't get that really miss the nature of power. It's basically to defeat your enemy. You rarely have perfect candidates doing this. So what happens with Carter is he is the first to introduce neoliberalism, which is going to mean letting corporations do pretty much what they want to, and making it hard on the masses of people while it's not being identified that that's what he's doing. So when he comes into office, Carter faced a number of extreme crises. OPEC had formed, which was the union of oil exporting countries in the Arab world. And as a result, you had an extreme rise in oil prices. He faced, as I pointed out before, the collapse of the Bretton Woods Agreement. And so now, while the dollar is still the major currency in the world, it's in decline. And the Bretton Woods Agreement that creates the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and pegs the dollar to gold, all of this is in disarray. So he's facing that. He's also facing stagflation, inflation so high that it's just going through the ceiling. I bought my first house in 1980 at the end of Carter's presidency when Reagan first comes in, but actually I bought it just before Reagan comes in. The interest rate on a house was 16%. 16%. You understand? This is what he inherited. And then there was high unemployment and interest rates on other things, not just a house, was also high. So coming in, the logical way you deal with this and the way that works is for the system, it's called Keynesian economics. And what you do is you go in and you pump money into jobs. You pump money into education. You pump money into healthcare. You pump money into those things that will save people, you know? But that's not the course that he chose, this guy from Plains, Georgia. And don't forget, he graduated from Annapolis. He's a submariner, nuclear engineer. And by the way, he favored nuclear energy, you know, which is a whole set of problems in and of itself. So Carter doesn't choose to go the way that the Chinese went when the economy collapsed in 2008. They went to building infrastructure. They went to building housing. They went to building bullet trains. My wife and I, we went to China on our honeymoon, 2011. And I mean, it's like a rebuilt country. But that's how they avoided the sinking that happened in 2008 in this country. Because when Obama comes in, he saves the rich and does nothing for the poor. And now he says he wishes he had gone big. And Biden had advised him to go big, which means to invest in the economy. But that would be biting the hand of the rich, because the rich don't want anything going anywhere else other than their pockets. And that is really spite, you know, cutting off their nose to spite their face. So instead of responding and furthering the Great Society goals that Johnson had, that's a response to the Black freedom movements and the other movements that come along, including the anti-war movement, he buys into this argument of the Trilateral Commission that there's an excess of democracy. He sat in on the executive committee meetings, and he was very smart. And he was smart enough to know to serve the master, Rockefeller, and the rest of them. Trump is now serving these same groups, except it's a techno group, it's an investor group, it's a crypto group, it's a whole bunch of these others. He's got the MAGA movement, but they set the agenda for him. So Carter appoints, as I said, to his cabinet Trilateral Commission people. First of all, Zbigniew Brzezinski, which in the writing on Carter, they try and make it look like he was at odds with Zbigniew Brzezinski, never did anything Zbigniew Brzezinski wanted. Zbigniew Brzezinski is the one that made him president, because he's the one that introduces him to Rockefeller. So if you think he had no influence over Carter, you need to think again. So his Secretary of Defense, his Secretary of State, all his major vice president, they were all trilateralists, all on the same page. And then he does what really indicates what he's really about. He appoints Paul Volcker to be his Secretary of Treasury. Paul Volcker. Now, this is a kiss of death for anyone that is, he was appointed head of the Federal Reserve. This is a kiss of death for anyone that wants to get a job or do well. And he knew it, and he said so. And at his memorial, when his domestic policy advisor spoke, he talked about how unpopular this decision was, but he went and did it anyway. Because it was unpopular, because what he was going to do was hurt millions of people. So what does he do? He raises interest rates to the ceiling, He says to end stagflation, but it's really to tame the working class. And so Volcker buys into Friedman's analysis of neoliberalism. And basically, neoliberalism is based on the fact that, on the argument that markets, just let the markets do their will and everything will be all right. In the ideal world, there'll be supply and demand. And so workers will have their skills, employers will hire them, and they'll pay them nicely. That's pure theory and pure bull. And they knew it. And it's only when the economy collapses in 2008 does Milton Friedman admit that he was wrong. But as long as he can get away with it, he's selling this not only to Carter, to Volcker, and to Reagan, and Clinton comes on board willingly. And so instead of doing what Roosevelt did, which was to empower workers, to increase economic growth, and raise wages by supporting workers and unions. So he goes against this whole policy that would have benefited the average person, black, white, brown, red, and yellow. And he proceeds to adopt neoliberal policies, which are generally not associated with Carter, but he's the one that starts it. So the first thing he does is deregulate industry, starting with the airline industry. So there's an argument that his people put forward, and the media doesn't challenge, that when he deregulated airline prices for a ticket, more people could fly, and the price went down. Now, the very opposite was the case, that the prices of airline tickets went through the ceiling. Regional airlines failed and collapsed. And, all they did was concentrate wealth when it came to the airline industry into the big airlines. He did the same thing with trucking. He deregulated trucking. Before there was deregulation of trucking, truckers had guarantees from their unions. They had high pay. They didn't have long working hours. But once he deregulates trucking, then what happens, and my brother's son, my nephew, he owns his own truck. He runs a trucking business. My brother helped him get that business. He's very smart, Kenneth, and very nice brother, And, he makes money, but the amount of money he has to put into, one, maintaining his vehicle, the cost of gasoline, and everything else. He has to work extremely hard to make any kind of money. But for most people who are truckers, they don't own their own trucks, and they're driving for someone else. Deregulation just put them in the basement. So accidents increased for truckers. They were falling asleep at the job, and they were having to work 10 and 14 hours a day. This is what Carter actually did, but that's not discussed by the media. Carter opposed labor reform. And so there was a labor reform bill introduced to Congress during Carter's administration that the Democrats would have voted for. Carter blocked it. And then what he did was insist that a watered down labor bill include right to work provisions. Right to work is a code word for particularly southern states and other states or places where most people are non-union. And so what he wanted written in there was something that favored non-unions, low pay. And so this was also what Carter chose as a path to favor markets over people, to favor the profits of the rich over the poor. So on the international scene, then that meant structural adjustment. If you got any aid, then you had to quit investing in healthcare, quit investing in education, and sell your gold and even your water off to private corporations for next to nothing. So this is Carter, you know what I mean? And this is laying the foundation for Reagan. Now, we know pretty much, a lot don't, but some do, what Reagan did. I should say this. Most community organizers don't know what neoliberalism is. You know that? Your Congressional Black Caucus doesn't tell you about it because they're owned by them. Only a handful of them are independent of them because they finance their campaigns. So you're not going to get it from the people who are closest to this power and knows the most. They're telling you the least, you know, and doing even less for you. Even the head of the IMF said, and he was managing director of the IMF into the late 70s, he said that investment in growth in the area of jobs, education, and healthcare is the best way to go. But the IMF was there to enforce these sanctions because the money that's going to be lent to them are coming from, some of it from government accounts and some of them from private investors. But when it comes time to getting the gold, owning the gold or the water, those are private companies coming in and grabbing it. So it reached a point in South Africa when they took over the water in South Africa, people couldn't flush toilets. You understand? Because it costs too much. The cost of flushing all that water into the sewage system. So Carter's neoliberal policies hurt Africa, hurt Asia, less, especially with China, because they weren't jumping to that tune. But those Asian countries that accepted aid, that's what they came under, like Indonesia. They came under a neoliberal regime and also had their government overthrown, the government of Sukarno, where 1 million people were assassinated. And University of California trained people were put in charge of their economy, neoliberalists. In Chile, neoliberal trained economists trained at the University of Chicago under Friedman were put in charge of that economy after they overthrew Allende, orchestrated by the Nixon administration. So I'm just telling you that when you look at this, Carter was knowingly implementing policies that triple debt paid by the poor, reduced incomes, and in fact, today, the standard of living, the income for the average worker in this country is lower than it was in 1970, based on what you can buy. And the cost of everything has gone through the ceiling. Housing, a car. I mean, housing is so much that most younger people are now priced out of ever being able to buy a house, especially if they live on the East Coast, certain areas, the big cities in the Midwest, or on the West Coast. And it's going up in the South, though. In the suburban areas, it's lower, but it's still going up. So when we looked in at what the effect of this deregulation was, consumer prices rose by 164% from 1978 prices, 164%. The same thing you got now, where you're talking about, oh, the reason why Trump got into office is the price of food. Like Biden was responsible for that. Huh? No, the food industry is responsible for that. Presidents don't really have control over that. But you can blame somebody that you want to put out. But the fact is, that's part of neoliberalism. So Volcker's deregulation policies led to the collapse of the savings and loan industry that happens under Reagan and Bush 1's watch. And at least for Bush 1, he put some of them in jail. But the point is, once you deregulate, and this is what Clinton does when he comes into office, he deregulates the banks. He ends the Glass-Steagall provisions of the Roosevelt administration that prevented banks from going into the stock market. I'm sitting down with the banker that I deal with, and he's bringing in a brother who's on the private side, and he's going to tell me what I can do to make some money on the private side. I says, a big old brother and smart, and graduated from one of these elite high schools in Oakland, you know. And when I asked him, was this before the election, I asked him, who are you going to vote for? I knew I had no right to ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The guy that referred him to me is an Asian. I ain't going to ask him. He didn't give me an answer. He just said it wasn't high on his agenda. That was pretty much telling me probably going to vote for Trump. Because if it ain't high on your agenda, then it means that money is more in your interest. So now the banks have a section where, you know, your savings are FDIC insured up to $250,000. But then there's another section that will try and persuade you to put your money into the private sector. And of course, they'll tell you that you could lose it. And then they'll also say, well, I know since you're older, you're probably not as willing to take risk. I said, listen, I ain't never willing to take risk. I go to Vegas and I put 25 cents in the slot machine, and that's it. Because ain't nobody wins but the owners, you know, of the casinos. And if Trump had been a good businessman, he could have gone to the bank after he built his first casino in Atlantic City. But he had to build a second one because the boy don't know business. And the whites think, oh, he knows business. He knows how to promote himself and enrich himself. Most of his business profits are coming from corporations that have his name on it. So he gets paid for his name. I know his father was sick when he found out just how dumb he was on the economy. He don't know nothing about the economy. And so now you're seeing him slap tariffs on everything. Tariffs are a tax imposed on goods coming into your country. Generally, they're for the purpose of making your goods competitive. The American economy thrived on tariffs so that they could keep out lower paying, lower priced British goods or European goods. And that allowed their economy to grow. But when America goes to any country, especially in the third world, they tell them it's a free market. And they took Jamaica's economy down under neoliberalism by forcing them, when they gave them aid, to lower the taxes or tariffs that they would put on competing goods like milk, like beef, and destroyed their industries. Did the same thing in Haiti with their rice crop. Forced them to bring down the price of, that is the tariff on rice, bring it down real low so that Bill Clinton could stick in the rice coming from Arkansas. I pointed this out before, and put people in the hunger line, you know? So this is neoliberalism. And so the collapse of savings and loans institutions comes after Carter's watch, but it's his policies that lead to that. And by killing labor reform bills, this is part of what weakens the Democratic Party with labor. And by the time you get to Clinton, Clinton is adopting Silicon Valley in place of labor. It used to be that the Democratic Party coalition was liberal, labor, Jewish, blacks. That was the coalition, and farmers up to a point. And, for a variety of reasons, whites left the Democratic Party. It wasn't just Carter's neoliberalism or Clinton's, but it was a major reason. Imhotep is right in terms of Carter's lack of business ability. And so you can predict that he's going to put the economy in trouble with his tariffs. He already did it in his first term, particularly hurting farmers. The tariffs that he imposed on goods coming, agricultural goods coming into this country hurt the farmers. And then what he had to do to make up for it was to provide cash to farmers to buy their votes. But that's not smart. And I pointed out in a previous show, he tariffed steel. America doesn't make that much steel. So when you're, and everybody has pointed out that knows anything about economics, tariffs are just the cost of whatever is added to something that's being sold in this country is passed on to the consumer. So you end up paying for it. So the estimates are that $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a year is going to be lost, and it could be more to each person in what they buy because the price is going to go up. But Trump got the idea that tariffs are a good thing, and then his idea is, let's see what happens when you do it. That's Trump. But don't think that's all that's going on. Project 2025 has got plans going on, so they'll allow for that, but they got a lot of other things going. So these are some of the measures that Carter introduced that, puts the condition of the masses of people in bad shape. And as a result of that, when Reagan comes in, Reagan's hit, and this is his big scam, he's defining big government as the big problem. And his plan that he moves on that is going to shape 80% of his agenda is coming from the Hoover Foundation, a foundation that I fought when they tried to destroy Black studies and beat them. That foundation represents particularly Southwestern wealth, and that's where he's coming from. He's coming from the West. And so these, again, were policies to break unions, to drive people into poverty, and to push a neoliberal agenda. But under this caption that big government is the big problem. And what's meant by that? Government that provides any kind of support for healthcare, any kind of support for education, any kind of support for housing, low-income housing. I pointed out before, he slashed half of the HUD budget, housing urban development, which is going to be headed by a Black preacher. It seems like Trump feels that that is the one area that he can give to a Black person. It was the same thing in his first cabinet, and this guy clearly doesn't know up from down. He's an ex-professional football player. He looks like he could still play football. He's an ex-state legislator in Texas, and he's a preacher. My God, a preacher. And when you listen to him, you could see he didn't know too much about HUD, housing and urban development, any more than Ben Carson knew about HUD. And here was a master surgeon. Put him in charge of health. brainwashed on politics, but at least he knew health. He's an innovator in surgery. Huh? The only thing he's going to do is surgery on the poor, that is, on their budgets. And that's pretty much what he let happen because Trump did all kinds of cuts for HUD, and he's got bigger cuts planned now. So this is Carter, and in this topic for today, Trilateral Commission, Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Trump, and Project 2025. So the major comparisons here are that basically Clinton carries this out in endorsing NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, which was a Bush administration policy, Bush 1, had been written by Bush, but he got thrown out of office, defeated by Clinton before he could implement it. Clinton implements it and does major damage to the poor. I didn't put Obama on this list because what Obama did was fail to deliver for the poor. He wasn't able to get through his Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Trump killed, which was at least as bad as NAFTA. So the point is this: if we're going to understand what Trump and his administration is doing right now, we need to understand that the foundation was laid by both Democrats and Republicans, with the exception of Biden, and the exception of those in Congress that support those policies, like Bernie Sanders, AOC, and those others that are on that side. And those are the ones, and us, because we're the ones that pushed Biden to make the moves that he made. That came from blacks picking him. He then, paid his base. And this is the key point I want to make here. Our major organizing has to be at the street level, but we need to understand the politics at the national level and affect them where we can. And one area is elections, and in other areas are where they make mistakes. And they're making some mistakes now. And as we sum them up, then it's going to show us better how we attack those mistakes being made by Trump's people. The key person to watch in all of this, when we look at Trump, next to Trump, the second most important person in Trump's administration is who? I want somebody to put up on here to tell me who's the second most important person in Trump's administration, because y'all should know power. So tell me, who is it? Somebody write something up here real quick, because I don't have time to waste waiting too long. Vance? No. Though he may be a replacement, he may not be. Musk? No. Though he's important, as long as he can stay in. Secretary of Defense? Oh, no, because he's basically, he's a know-nothing, and he's going to do what Trump tells him to do. Chief of Staff? No. Steve Miller? He's important because he's going to be overseeing the implementation of pushing people out of the country. He's over the people who are officially in charge of it. FBI? No. And in fact, again, controllers have been put in that position. Anybody else? Thiel, who financed Vance? He's not in too good with Trump right now, but no, No, the second most important person, and Trump said of this person, he knows how, Putin. That's a funny one. I have to laugh on that one, Gloria, because Gloria is one of the best informed people on this show, and she's making a joke. But yeah, he owes them, and he particularly owes organized crime. And who knows what exactly he owes Putin, but no, he ain't the main one. Trump said of the main one this. He said, He knows exactly how the government works, and he knows how to tear this system down. The man is Russell Voigt, Vought. He's in charge of the budget. He was in charge of the budget under the first, no, not Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon's on the outside, so he's pushing stuff, and he don't have the influence. He ain't on the inside. Did you hear what I just said? It's Russell Voigt, Vought, who was Trump's budget director in his first term towards the end, assistant budget director, then budget director. And he wrote a key chapter in Project 2025. Plus, he has his own think tank called the Center for Renewing America. So he's actually laid out a play budget to game plan this thing right now. So that's why I'm saying, if you think all of this is erratic and stuff, oh no, it's not. Project 2025. But this is the implementer, because power is where the money is. And so Russell Vogt is a key person, and you should have been watching him as he was being interviewed on the Senate. He's still being interviewed right now. You should watch him. He's a cold-blooded cat, slender, got him a little goatee, got his wife and children sitting behind him. You know what I mean? So here are some of the things that Voigt is basically going to do as head of office of the budget. Overall, he's going to cut taxes for the rich. He's going to eliminate regulations on corporate power. He's going to slash spending on government programs. Those are all the programs that benefit poor people, that the poor, the working and middle class, of which there's very little left, benefit from throughout the country. And this ain't just going to be black people. You hear me? But whites are being conned because the way you do them in is to say, you're doing us in. They didn't raise no cry when they did end welfare, except for 5 years, because they thought it was for black people. Guess what? The majority of people are on welfare are white people. Guess what? Huh? There's a bunch of poor white people because there's more of them. There's more poor people. Now, there's a greater percentage of blacks on welfare, but it's a large percentage and a hugely greater number. And so they were quiet on that. So Voigt has a number of offices that he's focused on. And since he's going to control the budget, and he said he's Trump's mind. He knows what Trump thinks. Trump doesn't really know, but he knows. And Trump likes it because in the end, it comes back to him. I mean, he's got to say so. So there are a number of massive offices that Voigt is particularly interested in exercising maximum control over. One is health, the other is education, the other is national security. But national security does not involve the Defense Department. What he wants to do is take these agencies, and in particular, education and health, because Medicaid is going to come under that, and they want to really cut Medicaid to pieces. He wants to break them into smaller units, and then appoint Trump loyalists who will be over them, and then we'll have a sign off on how much money goes to each one of these. You know, you're going to say this is chaotic. This is far from chaos. Voigt is also very concerned about what he calls managing the regulatory state. What it really means is he's very concerned about doing what Carter started, Reagan put into higher gear, and then Clinton continued, which is to see that business is as free as possible of regulation so they can do whatever they want. And the way he's going to do this is he's going to increase the funding for an office called the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA. It's a sub-agency of the Office of Management and Budget. And he's using a previous executive order of Bill Clinton so that he can review, quote, significant regulations and review over regulatory agencies. So he uses this Bureau of Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs to get down and really look at regulatory powers, because their goal is to take them off of big business and let them do their own thing. And by the way, Elon Musk, you don't even know what his authority is. He's in the executive office building. He's brought in a lot of techies to help him. He's using the same formula that he uses on X to slash and burn. But the key thing is Voight, and Voight is out into micromanaging the budget and the dollars. He wants to reinstate a policy called pay-as-you-go. And this, by the way, this is why you can't just rely on the Democrats. And anybody who saw me supporting Harris as supporting the Democratic Party, I ain't no Democrat, not a Republican. I'm not an independent. I'm a revolutionary. I only wanted to see Trump defeated. You understand? And I think 2 cents of Nancy Pelosi. She gets all this thing about being a great speaker because she got things done. Yeah, she did. But she has a rule, and it's a pay-as-you-go rule. Oh, that sounds real nice. You know what that means? That every program that costs some money that you put into effect, there must be a corresponding spending cut. Huh. Oh, ain't that nice? Why you think she stayed in office so long? So he's using that particular regulation to try and impose cuts on anything. Now, here's the deal. He is going to cut the taxes for the rich, $2 to $3 trillion. Then the move is to go and make these other programs pay for it. They're going to say if they don't, they're going to have to raise taxes. Well, yeah, they should. They should raise it on the rich. But that's going to be their excuse. That's a scam, So the other thing that he plans to do is to require in the shaping of the federal budget that each agency lays out their detailed spending plan and lay out their fiscal goals, and then he'll go in and slash. This is what you call control, because he's done it before. He knows how to do it. This is his specialty, So what he's going to do is lavish money on the rich, increase the military-industrial complex, and go after just about everything else. They are particularly interested in going after the Department of Education, which they say they want to end. And they call it, this should give you an idea of their rationale for justifying destroying it. They call it the Department of Critical Race Theory. This is what Voight calls it. And under the guise of wokeness and of, various kinds of policies that support the hiring of blacks and people of color who wouldn't be fired but for these policies, DEI, using this as the excuse for wiping that department out. He says it's so that education should be at the local level and parents should be intimately involved. No, it's so the rich can control those budgets that go to the local level. And you've already seen it in how they privatized education. You know, this district I live in right now, Oakland, at least 30% of that budget, the public school budget, goes to taking public money and financing out of the public budget, financing private schools through charter schools. But it's a whole series of other things, and then going after anything that will be teaching anything about your history and culture. So what's the difference then between Carter, Clinton, Reagan, Bush, and Trump? In many ways, you're seeing similar policies, and it's neoliberal, market-oriented. But what's different is this is a move to take over government and break it into parts. The parts that benefit the average person, and then to build up the parts that benefit the rich. This is a takeover of government and a restructuring of government. And it's a step down the road of fascism. So that's the big difference. It's challenging the structure of the executive arm of the Republican state structure. And it's doing its best to see that it's subject to the will of a few. As Musk said, it's a few men that should run things. And he's doing the same thing in Europe, which I pointed out last week, in supporting right-wing governments, especially in Europe right now. So these are some of the policies that come behind trilateralism and then MAGAism and the other forms of right-wing policies that really determine where things are going. So if we're going to organize correctly, we need to understand what's going on and then how we organize. Because if people know the real aim of this isn't cutting fat, it's to make fat cats fatter, and then you can actually show people how, then you have a way of attacking this, particularly at certain points. So this is the overall thing. And so the boycott is one thing that blacks can work on an overall thing to attack this. But there are a lot of other ways to do it as well. The key thing is this falls out, it's going to hurt everybody. It ain't just black people. And in fact, the biggest part of the people they're going to cut in the civil service, those are whites. They're over 60% of the civil service. They're going to be cutting them. You hear me? And they're going to be crying. They're starting to cry right now because a couple of million notices have gone out to civil service workers, putting them on alert that they're up for being done in. And this is the scare thing. And then they're going to pick and choose who they go after. You hear me? So we need to know what they're doing so that we can have a basis for fighting that. And then we need to build strong organization in our communities for rebuilding our communities, rebuilding our families, building institutions. Most black nationalists have gone out of the institution building. They don't build black schools anymore. The Nation of Islam is outside of, though they're not a black nationalist organization, you might think so. They're not into small businesses. They don't have them anymore. You know what I mean? And that's a key thing that we have because the majority of jobs in this country are provided by small business. And so helping the businesses we have and supporting them, but building more. That has to be a part of it. But we have to do mass-based organizing, because there's a lot of ways that we have to be able to strengthen ourselves. We have to use a crisis as an opportunity. We have to come out stronger than we went in. Wolf Manlew says, I think another reason for low volume of outrage, too many feel these billionaires are really geniuses. Well, Trump would be one example that shows that he's not. Or Musk may be, but he's a technological genius. He's not political genius. But what he's learned is if he puts enough money in a campaign, he could actually influence the course of who's sitting in the White House. But that was largely based on mistakes made by the Democrats, you know. And so he's taken this formula around the world. And so what he's trying to do right now is shift power in Germany. He's supporting the right-wing party. The problem with that strategy for him is all parties up to now in Germany have agreed that the right wing will not be given any access to government. So he just delivered a speech in Germany where he said that the Germans need to move past being feeling guilty for the crimes they committed, the genocide they committed, not just against Jews, gypsies, the left, anyone that opposed Hitler. And there's been an outcry in Germany against that, but the right wing likes it. And there's been a break. Inside of Germany, the leading candidate for being head of the government of Germany has said that he will admit the right wing in to having some say-so on border policies, because that's been the real issue in Europe as it has been here among whites. So he's trying to push a wedge there. And so you see why he broke up what is now X and lost some money. He was turning it into a right-wing platform. 200 million people, you know, that was his objective. So you got to understand that. So the fact that, as Wolf Manlew says, there are some of us who think that they're geniuses. Genius is only a genius in an area. And outside of that, they're dummies if they try and move outside their area. And everybody's like that. What we don't know for all of us is much greater than what we know. So I don't care what your so-called smart level is, go outside that level and you're a dummy. Imhotep said he has the money and just blew up a spaceship. Yeah, well, he's got the money because he got government contracts. He got his electric automobile off the ground in part through China, but now China has outfoxed them. They control the electric car business around the world. In fact, they control the automobile business around the world, you know? So I'm suggesting to Afrocentrists, study Africa, keep studying. Study Afro-America, keep studying, and study your enemy. You should have been doing this all along, you know? Huh? In fact, it's interesting, when I started apprenticing under John Henry Clark, he tried to do the same thing. I've said this in a much earlier show. He tried to do the same thing to me because I'm a seasoned organizer and seasoned scholar. I started with him in the 70s. And so I said, John, what should I read? And so he's sending me to white scholars because his master author Schoenberg had sent him to white scholars first. He said, you must first learn how your enemy is taking you out of history before you study how to make history, study your own history. So he's doing that with me. He gave me I've told this to some people before. He said I should read Decline of the West Volume 1 and 2. I said I read Decline of the West, Volume 1 and 2, Man and the Techniques, and Hour of Decision. Those were all the books that this author wrote. John had only read, Decline of the West, which is a master work. So then, since he couldn't give me that assignment, he told me to read the 6 volumes of Churchill, his stuff on World War II, which I said, oh, really? And I read it. But the point that John was saying is studying history just ain't studying yourself. Some of us think that's militant. It's understandable when you wake up, you're going to plunge into your past. But you're living in the real world. You better understand how it works and who's messing it up. So I hope people got something out of this. This is a little jazz that's coming down here. You know what I mean? I'm going off a 1-page outline here. That's it. 1 page. So, and I'm going to keep doing that. You know what I mean? So this is a little jazz that I'm putting out here, but I hope you all use it. So until the next time, Hotep, and I'm going to see if there's any comments that people have that require any comments or answers on. Maria Carter Evan was good. I'm glad you have a home library. That's good. That's a large 1 page. Yeah, but it's not saying anything. It's just a topic, and then I go off the topic. Wolf man, okay, Wolf. Yeah, and the key thing is knowing the enemy in the past, but knowing the enemy right now. A lot of the people that messed up who were Afrocentric and didn't vote or voted, some of them voted for Trump, then there's something wrong with them. But they were going off past information, citing all the stuff about white supremacy and why the Democrats and Republicans are the same, blah, 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 and wasn't dealing with the current stuff. When I first started, I hadn't read that much. I wasn't that informed. And that was good because I wasn't tied down to some philosophy or ideology. I was just dealing with the situation and went in and studied that. And I've always tried to go back to being open the way I was when I was young. I try that. I try to keep that openness, but it helps once you get older to know something. But don't follow an ideology. Follow the truth. Yeah, Maria Carter Evans, Trump won't allow Americans to buy the Chinese EV because they put, I think, 100% tariff on them now. But even then, they're cheaper than American cars. Yeah, well, that's a good way to lose because all China does is shift their markets because they got markets all over the world, Peggy Parks Miller, the arrogance of these people is their weakness. Yeah, that's a very good point. You just have to note what arrogant policies open them up to a successful attack. Gregory Jones, Musk has the privilege of inheriting from the financial system of apartheid South Africa. Question, was Bill Clinton a member of the Trilateral Commission when he became president? That's a good question. He may have been. I don't know. I have to go check that one out. I don't know. Imhotep said, I don't think he's a genius. I think he just takes over other businesses. Well, whatever he is, I don't know. He's not a dummy on what he does, but that doesn't make him good at everything else. Peggy Parks Miller, thank you for the compliment. Robin, turn lemons into lemonade. Maria Carter Evans, we need to create our own trajectory. Our energy should be spent on us. We've done our part, and everyone else always benefits the most. Time we flip that paradigm. Yeah, I'll be spending a lot of time on models and systems that we can use in terms of rebuilding families, communities, and nations. And that's going to be a major piece, and a lot of other things. And we'll be bringing on a lot of people who are doing stuff, you know. Wolf Manlu, I think they brainwash the masses and the lie. It's good for business, good for you. Not the majority of our people. They have brainwashed sectors who have placed money over their people, their own personal self over the group. That's not most of our people. And that's proven by what we do collectively. And we're intelligent collectively. I was woke up by Black folks. Wolf Manlu, they'll rewrite the last 400 years of American history. Yeah, it's not so much that they're into rewriting. They're trying to eliminate the writing. And frankly, America is US of A, United States of Amnesia. So it fosters its own forgetting. That's America. And that's also why Trump could get over playing on that. Oh, I also want to thank Ogawa for the thumbnail that he did for this show that shows up on the page that's advertising the show for YouTube. Thanks, brother. Real nice. Imhotep Theo financed Vance, correct. Wolf Manlu makes the point that there's hardly any steel made here anymore, which means that most of the steel is imported, subject to tariffs. Watch how this affects the rebuilding after all these disasters. Yeah. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, first of all, that the U.S., through the people that own the country, would give up steel making. But since they gave up industry, that makes sense that they would give up steel making. I mean, that's the dumbest thing. You give up an industrial base. Wolf Manlu's talking about crypto. Crypto is very unpredictable. So you should either put very little in it, or you should have a lot to lose and be able to afford it. If not, good luck. I know people that have lost $200,000 to $300,000 on crypto, and these are smart people. Gregory Jones, was Zbigniew Brzezinski President Obama's foreign policy mentor? No. But he was heavily for Jimmy Carter. Okay. Okay, let's go down here. Okay, Peggy Parks Miller asks that I post the address where checks can be mailed. Ogawa, do me a favor. Post up on this screen here my address. Are you listening, Ogawa? Ogawa, I know you are. The address is 11015 Monin, M as in mother, O, N as in neither, A, N as in neither, Monin Street, Oakland, California, 94605. Ogawa, do me a favor and post this up here, my address, so she can get it. Wolf Manlu, it's not amnesia. It's a plan of the Caucasoids to relegate anything black to obscurity while claiming it for them. M-O-N-A-N, put an N at the end of that. 11-0, and then it's 1-5. 11-0-1-5. And then M-O-N-A, and then an N. And then the rest is right. No, this is an amnesiac country. And you need to know, if you know the history, you'll know it. And it's not just this country. The British have a pretty bad case of amnesia, but America's case is real bad. That's a whole nother discussion. Okay. Yeah, I would be very careful with crypto. You hear me? Very careful with it. Okay, folks, that's it. Hotep. Until next week.